In the middle of June of 2017, woke up one day to this story about a U.S. Navy destroyer that had inexplicably collided with a massive moving mountain of a cargo ship off the coast of Japan. Now, reading through the story and having been involved tangentially in investigations like this, it seemed really, really odd to me that they had so much information so fast, and that this was even possible. Now, the nail in the coffin for me was that there was even a press conference scheduled. In the military, when there are events like this that result in loss of life, the standard go-to is you release a statement that is cleared through intelligence, and you leave it be until you know what the hell you're talking about. That they sent this admiral out before cameras and microphones to speak about this shows they had an intent to control the story. And that alone sent up 1,000 red flags. Now, a lot of people at the time, June 2017, were looking into this. But it became very apparent that it was only going to be used as a political football to demonize the previous administration, and no one was going to look at the story critically. Well, I'm not going to rehash the entire investigation in this video, but we proved beyond the shadow of a reasonable doubt that this was a coordinated strike, that and the McCain. The ship involved, the ACX Crystal, was transmitting using a Class B transponder, which is illegal, criminal, and violates the Treaty of the Seas. None of these big vessels have Class B transponders. Those are meant for little yachts and fishing boats. The admiral, 3 times in his press conference, misreported the time of the collision off by an hour, even after having been told he was wrong by the Japanese self-defense forces and their Coast Guard. And when confronted with that, still didn't retract his statements or amend them. It was an absolute insane time. For anybody who's ever been a part of military intelligence or investigations, I don't know how anybody was looking at this and going, this is normal. Well, we have some new information. A judge has ruled that the remarks by the higher-ups during this time jeopardized the investigation. Now, they're not going to dismiss the charges, but this was another allegation that I had made, that you had all these guys way up the chain, all the way to the admiral in charge of the 7th Fleet and the Navy itself, getting involved in this, making these grandiose statements about poor training and lack of seamanship and all this other, and exhaustion and being tired and cross-decking and all this other nonsense, before the reports were even issued, even the preliminary reports or the final one. Low-level officers might make this mistake and get reprimanded for it, but these guys were admirals. So clearly there was a narrative that had been pre-contrived for this, and that was the allegation. I caught a lot of heat for it. People came and said, well, you know, McGee, accidents happen and the Navy is really bad since Obama, blah, 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 blah. But then when we showed the electronics evidence and we showed the clear misstatements and contradictory statements in both the preliminary report and the final report, people started to look a little more critically at it. And that's when they started taking this off of the news and stopped reporting on it. In fact, I didn't even know this had gone on until I realized USNI is now under a gag order. They are not even allowed to report on it because they were my go-to. All of this stuff happened and USNI didn't say a word. I had to find this through Stars and Stripes. This is the Washington Times, actually. And that's the conservative version of the Washington paper. The Washington Post is the liberal one. I'm wondering if this is what they were going for all along. That they wanted to jeopardize this trial so that the information never saw the light of day. I think they were really hoping this guy was going to cut some kind of a deal so it never made its way into open court. The real information about what happened, about how allegedly hanging from the side of the skin of the ship, this guy was able to call for help. Because both of those things just don't work in the same world. If he was in his cabin during this event and asleep during this event while the ship was under duress, that makes no sense. If he wasn't there, why was he hanging by the skin of the ship? And if he truly was, after the event, hanging by the skin of the ship, how in the hell was he able to contact the bridge when 1MC was down? To actually send for people, which is what they reported. It's insane. And that's just one example of all of the things that are wrong with this story. Now, we had to do a lot of speculating, and I will admit that, about what happened. The idea that this massive cargo vessel changed direction twice before the collision into the path of the the Fitzgerald. Then, all of a sudden, did this magical 90-degree turn, another 90-degree turn, then went downrange a half an hour, came back uprange another half an hour, and then all of a sudden, magically, its transponder changed from a Class B transponder to a Class A transponder signal, which we showed in the track that's on YouTube that I've used. I can't think of the Vessel Finder track. It's absolutely nuts. And the fact that there was no call for an hour of any distress, and simultaneously the ACX Crystal and the USS Fitzgerald at the exact same time, completely out of communication with each other, each reported independently to their own independent authorities at 0220 hours. When now we know the collision happened at 0130 hours, regardless of what this graphic says. And they have had to bury this story. There is no way, and I think it's odd, these guys in the background, this is a great picture. It really is. And those guys, I guarantee they're spooks. Because I think they had very little time to cook this thing up. And they didn't have a chance to pass it up the chain and have anybody proofread it and walk the steps out logically, hoping that they could just control the narrative. Cost this guy his job, his career, actually. This guy, Admiral Lecoyne, decorated fighter pilot. This guy was not one to miss attention to detail. So if he went into a press conference that went on for nearly an hour and at 3 separate times misreported the time of the accident, I guarantee at that point the U.S. Navy had no independent information of their own about what happened that night. They were simply going on the reports from the cargo crew. And there's no way the Navy, in any other normal situation, would put anyone in front of microphones and cameras if they weren't sure, unless they had a narrative they needed to push. And that happened again 2 months later with the McCain in nearly the same region in the 7th Fleet, all right around the same time that North Korea was launching missile after missile after missile, testing nuclear weapons. And all of a sudden, after the Fitzgerald goes away, in July 4th, the North Koreans tested their most successful launch ever. It had been kind of a running joke that North Koreans were testing missiles, and You know, they would launch and then they would fail 30, 45 seconds in every single time, and they were just not working. But then all of a sudden, after the Fitzgerald goes away, they get one basically into orbit. Perfect test. So clearly the USS Fitzgerald, or these destroyers, were involved somehow in some way with interdicting those missiles. And when we looked into the laser systems that we've talked about extensively, it's very clear they were designed to be operated aboard destroyers. And the Chinese, probably with the help of the Russians, took out 2 of them. And we lost 17 sailors in the process. And now they are seriously still trying to make us believe that it is training, that they are going to revamp their surface training so that destroyers that can turn on a dime within their own ship length inside of a minute, the sailors need to know how to maneuver their ships better so that they don't get clobbered by giant moving mountains that are the size of small cities. It's ridiculous. And now they're saying, you know, and this could take years. You want the American people to believe that it's going to take you years to retrain your entire Navy to avoid getting hit by cargo containers? Really? $2 billion assets that can see the flight path of a mosquito 3 miles away and throw a tomahawk. I almost said something I shouldn't have, but it's nuts. It's just absolutely beyond the realm of believability. I don't know how anybody at this point can even make any real allegation that what the Navy is saying is remotely anything like the truth. I just don't get that. And if anybody, believe me, check my channel. There are probably no less than 3 to 4 dozen videos detailing every specific part of this. There are people that are going to show up down in the comment section that can point you to the links, that can show you right through the reports, moment by moment by moment, the complete, utter failure of the Navy to concoct even a remotely believable story. So this is their final stage, I guess. But we will leave it there. Like, share, subscribe.